Namaste and welcome to the Thursday 10 p.m. show. And as always, we have Shri Vibhuti Jha, who is rejoicing today and for good reason. And we have Sandeep Balakrishna ji, and we are going to talk about secularism and jihad. And I just pose a straightforward question. As far as the Indian context is concerned, Sandeep ji,
Mhm.
is there a correlation between secularism and multiple forms of jihad mushrooming?
Okay, I'll be blunt, and as always, it's a pleasure being on the show. So, what was the question again? Is there a connection between secularism and various forms of jihad?
Yes,
Secularism itself.
correlation. I use the term correlation.
Okay, is there a correlation? I'll rephrase it, I'll phrase it in a different form. I'll say secularism itself is one of the very many variants of jihad.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's
That's all
that's
it
that
is.
that's
So,
an, I think that will
that's all it
need a bit
is.
of explaining. So please.
Yeah, it's there. I mean, in lived practical experience of 75 years, this is what our experience has been. And this whatever secularism, 75 years of secularism, one fatal consequence of what is known as Indian secularism is that today we have a party that espouses secularism, and that party allegedly claims that it got freedom for India from the British, aka the Europeans. That party today has been headed by a foreigner, a European, for the last 20 odd years, and whose completely unemployable son is in the grip of breaking India forces. You call these, whatever names of these breaking India forces, you call them woke forces, you call them Islamic forces funded by petrodollars, you call them this evangelical missionary, whatever network. He is in the grip of these forces. So if this is not jihad, whatever name you can give it, right? Whatever name you can give it, it is jihad. And the foremost enabler has been the secularism which was espoused by Nawab Nehru 75 years back.
Right. You wrote this book called 70 Years of Secularism. And in this 70 years of secularism, you wrote a lot of articles. In fact, it's a collection of many articles and chapters as well. And you also correlated the vandalization of history with the efflorescence of Indian brand of secularism.
Hmm.
One question that always comes to my mind is that when we talk about this being secular,
Hmm.
now, as far as I know or I understand, secularism is actually an attribute of the state. But
Hmm.
in India, it seems that every individual is expected to be secular.
Yeah, well, this is one of those. This is one of those. How do I put it politely, Sanjay ji? Please help me. Okay, let me
No,
tone
no,
it
don't
down.
need to put it politely.
So, uh, let me moderate my language. So, this is one of those feats, great feats of logic that is mentioned that you find profusely in many Asmani kitab and derivatives thereof. This is one of those reasonings as far as the practical implications of secularism are concerned in India. It is nothing like Asmani kitab except that the prophet of secularism in India was Nawab Nehru. I keep mentioning him, Nawab Nehru, because there's nothing about Nehru or his family, especially about Jawaharlal Nehru, was remotely Indian or remotely Hindu. From his dress, from the multiple kitchens in his house where beef was being cooked. Remember that all the women folk in Nehru's family were devout Brahmins, Kashmiri Pandits. You see, you espouse these things have a way of coming together. Maybe not in our own lifetime, कि जैसे बोलते हैं ना, बुजुर्गों का पाप, the future generations have to suffer. So this is what is happening there. On the one hand, you have all these, devout women in Nehru's family, in his household, and in the same household, you're cooking beef in the kitchen, really? So, jab tak all these women, maintain this Hindu-ness, whatever was left in the household, tab tak their family ka dharm ka chhatrachaya tha. And this fellow, when he started, espousing this secularism, look, Sanjay ji, you mentioned secularism in the context of state, right? So here's
Right.
the thing. In most countries, in most what is known as advanced democracies, whatever that means, in most countries, uh, leaders would go out on the field and canvass, support for their party or their candidatures on what were their pitches, basically. Road bana dunga, I will, improve the happiness of your community, or, whatever is broken, I'll fix it. These are practical issues. So every leader in the so-called Western democracies would base his or her election campaign pitch on these practical issues. But by some miracle of this Asmani Kitab authored by Nehru, he would say, why should Indian democracy, why should you elect me? Why should people elect the Congress party? Because secularism has to be saved. Does it give you roads? Does it make your life better? Does it give you, tap water, working system, basics which people have taken for granted, and rightfully, they should take these things, basic things for granted. No, you should vote for the Congress party and Nawab Nehru because secularism should be preserved. This is another variant of a very, very famous rallying cry among the Muslim community. Islam खतरे में है, नेहरू जी को वोट दीजिए, नहीं तो सेक्युलरिज्म खतरे में पड़ जाएगा. So you do this for the better or worse part of 55, 60 years, and you get 70 years of secularism, or 75.
All right. It's been 5 years since your book was written, I guess.
Yeah.
Vibhuti Ji.
Yeah, I mean, taking the cue from Sandeep ji, taking the cue from your, Nawab Nehru, who the entire clan, I prefer to call them these days the Voldemort family. Whose
They
name
are. They are.
they are the Voldemort family. But this is what
Look,
worries me.
today again he made that snide remark about Savarkar.
Yeah.
Yes. So I think the entire Nehru clan is a Voldemort family, hurtful to India, disparaging to things Hindu. I do not know. I don't have any DNA proof to say otherwise, but one wonders about their authentic DNA. That definitely needs to be found out but the issue here is very simple, and that really bothers me. That the Nehru clan used the word secularism to somewhere along the line, the simple Hindu, the Sanatani Hindu, they tranquilized them and used the word secularism as a sedative. So as a result of which, we have ended up becoming lotus eaters. That's the one which is worrying me a lot. That is the part which has affected the culture part of it. So my inquiry with you is secularism destroying the Hindu ethos? My own answer is yes. How? Because we are essentially secular. Sanatan is essentially secular. It doesn't impose conditions. How do we fight that? The question now in the 21st century is the global attack on things us. So much so that worldwide newspapers are writing, under the Hindu rule, secularism under threat in India. And then you have this Rahul Feroz Gandhi, who keeps going about.
He's Rahul Rajiv Gandhi.
I'm Rahul Rajiv Gandhi, whatever. Everybody knows the meaning. I don't care.
Roman Gandhi.
Yeah. So how does one in this 21st century, how do we get up and rise and deal with that
Okay.
without being tranquilized?
Well, you have asked me 10 questions so far.
Yes, that's the whole idea. Give you
Okay,
enough
let's see.
material. Pick and choose your answers.
He's a Republican politician now.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Thanks for reminding me.
Yeah, we only ask questions. By the way, I must tell you that I have said
Yeah,
this, that Republicans are like Hindus. We know how
yeah.
to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory.
Well, you're being unfair. You're being unfair both to Hindus and Republicans, though I
Yes.
get your larger point. I take your larger point. Uh, but see, here's the thing. You raised a very fundamental question about how Hindus were tranquilized using this word secularism. Actually, Hindus weren't tranquilized. We have to, contextualize this and quantify it in with what is known as data and in the broader socio-cultural phenomenon uh, during the time this bogus secularism was introduced by Nehru. Secularism, Nehruvian secularism, or whatever passes off as that. Uh, like I keep repeating, right? Indian secularism is the unwritten Quran of Nawab Nehru.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, you can quote this. Feel free. You don't even need to attribute, but this has to go out. It is the unwritten Quran of Nawab Nehru. So, number one, when you had elections in 1951, the first elections, 51 or 52. So people actually didn't even know what voting really means. So till date, you have a large mass of Indians who think that voting is some kind of a bargaining. Remember, this is a civilisational nation which had its own ethos, its own unbroken set of institutions, right? Which really didn't. And this transition from a Western imposed system called democracy, with this tradition was preserved. Our institutional memory has it remains extraordinary, and one place where you can that reflects this memories in our mutts and temples among other traditional institutions. So you have a hodgepodge. People didn't even know what they're voting for. More than 75 or 80% of the India of that period, voting population of the India of that period, didn't even know that they were under a different, fundamentally different kind of a governing system. So when you say that the secularism nonsense was tranquilizing Hindus, no, it didn't. The large masses of Hindus were grappling, between this old system and new system, and they were perfectly fine with the old system. Why are insisting that we go out and vote? But then the people, like, most of us are familiar with this thing that the Congress became better oppressors. They inherited the colonial British oppressive form of government. And they, kind of took it to a entirely new level. And that oppression was even more brutal because it was our own people who were oppressing us. So this tranquilization of Hindus using this word called secularism occurred, it didn't occur on a mass scale. But what happened was that because this one party and this one family, one dynasty, had access to complete power in which they monopolized ruthlessly and used it in a very brutal fashion, right? Because of that, this narrative was forcibly pushed down. And then when the whole, you do this for decades, the history of India after it attained an alleged independence, right? It is a history of one family. You needed an extremely strong leader, and 55 years Congress ruled unbroken, right? So that is a long time to capture all institutions and fill it with your own men. So when this happens, you need an extremely strong and powerful challenger which will make you completely irrelevant, because these things can't be destroyed overnight without a civil war. That didn't happen in 2014. So there is a beautiful Dr. S.L. Bhairappa in his Parva I keep, I use this analogy often, and I think it's relevant to this discussion, that how he has, it is set on a realistic plane. Parva is a retelling of the Mahabharata. So on a realistic plane, what happens is this famous Krishna and Kamsa, how Krishna vanquishes Kamsa. He recasts the whole episode in a very, very profound way and in a very realistic way. That, the power of Kamsa is derived by a bow. And the person, and Kamsa is supposed to derive his authority and his power, his tyranny, from a bow, which the strongest of the persons cannot break. Right? So this has been a tradition for several decades, at least in novel. And the bow is displayed in a public fashion, and on every year there is a festival that happens where all people from any country are invited to string the bow. But the bow itself acts as a great psychological force. Nobody takes up the challenge. That a lot of gods came, and a lot of warriors came, but nobody was able to break the bow. It's a great symbol. And then a teenage Krishna comes, and he says, for the first time in so many decades, and he says, that's all, this is a bow. Okay, why can't I try my hand? So people are astonished. They say, okay, try your hand. So he goes, he lifts up the bow. That is a bow that Kamsa had used when he was a teenager. Huge difference. So what is it? It is a wooden bow. It has not been cleaned. It has not been maintained. It is completely moth-eaten. So the moment Krishna lifts that, this boy lifts that up, it breaks into two. It doesn't take much strength. And that is when Kamsa feels scared that, my end has come. This is what happened in 2014. That this was this crumbling structure which was preserved artificially, preserved and maintained through tyranny and fear, and by populating all these institutions with your own yes men. And the way to do this is not to physically, harm them or declare war or, lead to some kind of anarchy. By the simple process of challenging them head on at the ballot box. Now what has happened is not only secularism is dead, you have reduced this guy whom Ram Jethmalani once famous said about Rahul Gandhi, that I won't even employ this guy to serve tea in my law chambers. It's there in public record. It's here on YouTube. We can check it out.
Yeah, of course it
So
is there.
this is what happened. Now, what have you reduced Rahul Gandhi to? He can say secularism, he can say Bharat Jodo, he can say whatever. You have forced him literally to go on the streets, which he was never accustomed to. Growing all this beard, the level of his what you call tomfoolery, which is self-imposed and controlled, he is the last pawn that these breaking India forces have. So this was a hollowness of secularism. But coming back to Dr. Jha's question, the amount of damage it has created, especially on the cultural and spiritual fabric and even the social fabric of Hindu civilization, has been enormous and irretrievable in many, many cases. You have lost several valuable traditions which were maintained, preserved and maintained by real living people. You have reduced former warriors, people who could scale mountains, people who could combat 100 people, head on in a physical combat. You have reduced them to a box, to a column in a census and official documents called backward tribes, scheduled tribes. These were people who were either instrumental or actually built up entire empires. So you have, this loss has been irretrievable on many planes. I think I've answered your question in a very tangential fashion, because I can go on and on.
No, this discussion needs to be had at multiple times in multiple ways. It is not that one time we have the discussion, it's over. Because you brought in a very, very significant point, that an act of just raising the dhanush led to the shaking of the system.
mm,
So the question that arises in my mind is from there, what must the Sanatanis do
mm,
to shake the system? And it was in that context that I had used the word
mm,
tranquilized or sedated.
mhm,
When are we going to awaken? That's the
mm.
point. What do we do, knowing what we know now? That's
No.
what I'm trying to say. That it is a sad travesty of the truth that we have forgotten our own dharmic responsibilities.
Mhm.
Your thoughts?
No, the awakening has happened actually. What
Yes.
has happened? The awakening has happened in multiple ways, and Jaipur Dialogues is one of the greatest examples. And I should really applaud Sanjay ji. I'm not just praising him because he's my friend and a longtime friend, but the
Thank you.
scale
Thank
on which the scale on which and the vibrancy of the Jaipur Dialogues summit this year, last month, it was serious. I mean, this has given birth to a serious, what I call a mini renaissance of sorts. What has happened is this kind of platforms and this kind of energy which was suppressed and which has been unleashed needs a concrete direction, and it should not be straight jacketed. That you have to go. Only this path leads to the goal. Not really. What we are doing essentially is that we are picking up all the broken pieces and trying to weave the fabric into a whole. So that will take a long time, and there are no easy answers to this, except that this effort has to begin at the level of a family. I keep repeating this. Unless you save Hindu children, unless you have this whatever, at least a nuclear Hindu family which is rooted in your culture, what built our traditions and our culture and made it so resilient, and we have managed to survive in a extraordinary fashion, is the process of patience, is a process of saving in a very, very profound way. That don't destroy the Himalayas, because tomorrow your grandchild, leave the beauty for your grandchild to savor the beauty of the Himalaya. So a lot of these things have happened. Now the destruction, like I said, has occurred at so many levels that people build civilizations, not theories. Secularism or this theory or that theory. They don't build civilizations. Theories come after practice. From noise evolved sound. From sound evolves language. To codify language, grammar came much later, because it has to be repeatable and verifiable. So we have lost those essential practices. To use a weasel word, we had kept all these things in practice, so we didn't feel a need to document them. Now that we have lost complete touch with these things, we need to document them, and we are struggling to kind of figure out how we actually lived in practice through books. That can never happen. So yeah, books are also important, but the generation that, at least Sanjay ji's generation, they are still in touch with their, what, how you spent your childhood, what are the specific aspects of your culture. So culture can't be taught actually. Some aspects of your practical life in your childhood, adolescence, etc. These things, if you can pass it on intangibly, then perhaps we might have a future which can be built on these foundations.
Okay, that is well taken. The point is well taken, and you use that analogy well. That okay, it was a moth-eaten kind of a place which was just waiting to be shaken up.
Mhm.
But I have another problem. When before I ask that question, I must ask my viewers to please shoot your questions to Sandeep ji, and also to please like this video, and remember that you have to share this video as well, and also have to subscribe to the channel, and also for some patram pushpam. So my point is that though it appears as if that edifice was broken, but in many ways that edifice still persists.
Mm,
Because in your book, you have made a great assault on Nehruism,
mm,
but Nehru is being vilified, but
mm,
Nehruism is still going strong.
mm,
So as long as Nehruism is going strong,
mm,
you cannot really get rid of this disease called what we have in the form of
mm,
Indian secularism, which is peculiar,
mm,
which is
mm,
not really secularism, a secular state.
mm,
It is some kind of a secular dogma which every individual must follow.
mm, mm. Yeah, well, you just invoked Sitaramji Goel. Said, my firm conviction is that if Hindu society has to survive, Nehruism must die.
Yes.
So that's what Sitaramji said, and he was bang on. Now, it survives in large part because it has permeated, like I said, all aspects of our society, and especially the urban Hindus and key institutions which shape your mind from a very young age, primarily education. Now, the guy who grows up reading this, Nehruvian establishment, the factory that is a Nehruvian establishment, which produces these history textbooks, whatever, sociology, civics textbooks, he or she, when they grow up, they will choose careers. Somebody might become a judge. Somebody might become, hotshot lawyer or a bureaucrat. They have no connection with that their roots. Now, a guy, a student who hails from a village and who is in touch with his roots, when he is put through these kinds of textbooks, he will instinctively know. The child instinctively knows that what I am reading and the life that I'm leading in my village, they are completely incongruent. But he has to pass the exam. अगर वो अपने घर के या अपने immediate surroundings के experience, based on that experience, if he writes the answer to these specific questions, he'll be failed. And who are the teachers who are evaluating him? They are also like this. They have also come from the same kind of a model. So you have these, when you say woke judges, this must be the only country in the whole world where these judges, where the judiciary is completely illiterate, ignorant about the culture of its own land. Yet, their ignorance does not prevent them from passing judgments on culture. It's an area where they have no business to be in. तो ये नेहरूवियनिज्म जो आप बोल रहे हैं ना, this will be, dismantled, and it should be dismantled at the level of the society. Your political class will be only as good or as bad as your society. When you bring up a generation or two generations of people who are culturally rooted, you will no longer have this problem. Your politics, your judiciary, your institutions will be attuned to that. So why this happened, this kind of Nehruism, pervasive Nehruvianism that you mentioned. You look at this golden period of Indian judiciary, which, I mentioned, which roughly began after India attained a questionable independence from roughly the 50s up to, say, even the mid 80s. It could be the Hindutva judgment. It could be various judgments relating to our societal practices, right? Those judges were culturally rooted. This, notwithstanding the merits of or otherwise of their judgments, these judges were culturally rooted. Now these guys have become unhinged. So this is no easy answer. Like I said, this reform, first of all, has to begin at the level of the family, which will eventually translate into a well-knit community. This civilization was built by a network of communities which upheld and believed in the same languages, same values, and the same gods and the same traditions. You might have had a multiplicity of deities, but the culture was the same. The fount that produced all these multiple deities was the same.
All right. Vibhuti Ji?
Yeah, I mean, Sandeep ji has brought out some such significant elements, that is, talking about the actionable plans, that, as the saying goes. He brought about the youth element part of it, the Nehruism part of it. So 54 years of a continuous rule, they have been they have successfully indoctrinated and affected us, the youth. So today's youth is sometimes wondering, and the international community, if you oppose if you talk about Gandhi and Nehru, you are branded as anti-India, destroying anti-Hindu or the Indian ethos. How does one contest that educational element? That's very critical. People blame Modi, he has not done enough. But 54 years of whatever has been institutionalized, with 5 or 6 education ministers turning the tables on the entire secular practice, it appears that adharma won at that war. Now the dharma has to rise. How does one go about it?
Well, by being Hindu, by rediscovering your own roots. One good way to do this is that learn your own language. And this whole business of trying to understand your culture, Hindu culture, through books, it might have its value, but that value is peripheral. It is a living religion. It is a living dharma. So unless that is kept up in acharana, unless it is kept up in practice, no amount of, reading it and writing scholarly thesis and rebuttals, it won't help. When you get confidence, when a musician gets confidence in giving a 3-hour all-night concerts, is when he has internalized it. Theory of music, a pure musicologist who writes, a scholar of music is not the same as a one, who's undergone the training and who's kept it in Anushtanam. So when you say, this gamakas should be like this should be like that in books, it doesn't work like that. The musician sits on the stage, or, you talk to him or her, and he will show it to you how it is done. This, learning Hinduism through books, or, how to go about it through talks and debates, which are all good. I'm not downgrading them. They have their place. When I say, a living culture, I have to give a rather blunt example. This is like going to your first night after reading Kama Sutra. It doesn't work like that. You have to live it. You have to live it. You have to experience it. So, Jo hai, all the people who have kept these practices alive, right? You live with them. So this divide, that where, I see these many things on social media, like greatness of Sanatan. They'll put some ruined temple, okay, and they'll say greatness of Sanatan. What greatness? That's a destruction. You don't celebrate. Why aren't we building those things again now? Those things were built by the entire civilization, by the entire community. What impelled them? It was not just money. The sculptors and the architects who built these temples, they were not doing this for money or due to patronage. It was a fulfillment. It was a fulfillment of a deep longing, a deep devotion, attachment to something that was profound and far more significant than their own ephemeral lives. How do you teach this? So when you ask me, with due respect, Vibhuti Ji, when you ask me what is the way forward, this is the way forward. We don't spend enough time getting to know our own culture by living it, by interacting with people who live it. Because all this Mahakal and Kashi and, whatever, which are all good signs and symbols and of hope, of resurgence, where is the people-to-people interaction? We go there for Mahakal, for tourism, clicking selfies, posting it on social media, saying, okay, one more tick mark on my list of travel or whatever. Where is the people to people interaction?
Okay, let's come to some of the more pressing contemporary issues which you pointed out in your book. And those are the forces that always counteract when they feel within
Mm,
quotes,
mm,
when they feel that
mm,
the country is not following the template that was set for them in the form of
mm,
secularism.
mm,
And then you have the human rights groups, then you have the Amnesty Internationals, then you
mm,
have the
mm,
several other
mm,
UN bodies and
mm,
NGOs who come
mm,
lecturing,
mm,
and you have the rating agencies
mm,
which start rating you low on the democracy
mm,
index, or
mm,
on the hunger index, or
mm,
even on the freedom index.
mm,
How do you deal with them? Because our
mm,
political forces, the politicians as they are, and the
mm,
political executive as it is,
mm,
they are prone to get under the influence of these international forces.
mm. Well, the dealing with all these amnesty types, and they are basically global blackmailers. As simple as that. They go India, poor and hungry, full of slums and prostitutes. तुम्हारा यही औकात है. So they were used to blackmailing our leaders. Our leaders, matlab, the head of one dynasty, masquerading as prime ministers. So they were used to dealing with this kind of thing. And that party was going on, smoothly for a long time. Everybody was happy. Now that the things have drastically changed, remember that the success of Mr. Modi is also the success of millions of ordinary Hindus like you and me. He tapped into this energy that was just simply tired and angry and frustrated and waiting for an outlet to burst. He gave them the outlet. Now, what is happening with these guys? Amnesty, I think today its license was cancelled. They have hundreds of cases against them, similar to other agencies like Oxfam and all these uh, global forces of destabilization, basically. Wherever these buggers step in, that country will be destroyed, if not tomorrow, but 100 years later. That we have understood. But the kind of people at the top, when you say the political class are, being are still scared to take these forces on, I think that is partially true. I think that is changing in a gradual way because the institutional takeover has been, so pervasive and so prolonged. Now, you tell me, I'll ask you a counter question, Sanjay. You've been a bureaucrat for all your life at the highest service, right? IAS.
Not all
So,
my
how
life.
many?
I,
Uh,
I've been away from it for last 2 years.
2 years is fine, fine. But for the previous 33 years, that counts for something.
35, yeah.
So, yeah, so that counts for. You tell me, in your own highest civil service in India, which is supposed to implement our policies and safeguard us and uphold India's interest and build this nation and instill pride. How many in your service over the last same 75 years or 70 years of secularism? How many of them are deeply, truly, genuinely committed to nation building?
Ah, I think uh, a percentage in single digit.
Thank you. So you shouldn't be asking me this question.
We are going to ask you the question because you've written the book. I haven't.
Yeah, absolutely. So these agencies, these global blackmailers, they have to be put to heel. And it is happening slowly, gradually, but it is happening. See, the fact, what is known as this, there is a seasonal rebellion that keeps happening in Congress. Why?
Congress is a fun topic, I think, that can consume
Exactly. So why
full
does it
episode.
happen? Why does all those guys who either defected to BJP or other parties, or some folks who simply they are remaining there because there are still no takers for them. Imagine that breed is also there in Congress. They're so bad, they're so useless that no party wants to take them. So why is this happening? Because like the international blackmailing agencies, the Nehru dynasty was the numero uno blackmailer. You run your ministers like a mafia operation by having files on them. When have they ever cared about India, sir? When they allowed all these termites from outside to infest us, hoping that we'll rule this country forever and nothing is going to happen. The former colonialists will protect us. How long do you think the party will last? But the damage they've done, and getting these guys out is a uphill task actually. On the one hand, you have a organization like Amnesty and Oxfam, which are funded by pretty much all the governments of powerful nations like the United States. How do you fight that? And the worst thing with India is that Indian employees out here of these agencies, Oxfam, Amnesty, Greenpeace, all those guys, Indian employees, they are used as cannon fodder against their own country. No other country has this amount of traitors in so many numbers at the highest levels. Short of a civil war, short of a violent purge, this thing, you have to give time to eradicate this kind of thing.
Okay, let me come with a follow-up.
Yeah.
Peculiarities of secularism, and one of the greatest peculiarities which people got fed up of was that secularism has almost always been interpreted in practice as anti-Hindu. So if you have to prove your secular worth, then you have to necessarily do something that should be anti-Hindu, just because Hindu happen to be majority. And even today, when the people like Owaisi, Hazrat Owaisi, when they tom the virtues of secularism, they have only one thing in mind, and that is privileges only to the quote-unquote minorities.
I've already answered. Na? When I said secularism is the unwritten Quran of Nawab Nehru, वही आ गया ना आपका एंटी हिंदू वाला.
Vibhuti Ji,
हो गया ना?
last word to you before we go to the audience questions.
No, this was a very important point. You are right, Sandeep Ji, that it has to begin from within. And, it is very important to remember that we have to fear, as somebody told me yesterday, Hindus need not fear anyone except the pseudo-Hindus within. They are our worst enemies, and you gave
Absolutely.
examples of that. So there is a need to expose that. But what I wanted to suggest was, is that, perhaps every viewer on this show today must make a commitment to learn one language which is not yours. That will make a significant difference. It makes, like Sandeep Ji, dropping the Hindi words, and you are very conversant with that. Those Hindi words that you have used, they are as much Sanskrit word as anything else. This is the beauty of our cultural milieu, that we don't learn other people's languages. We are very much satisfied within ourselves. So my suggestion to every viewer is, pick up a language which is not your own, something which is far out. Let it be Assamese, let it be Malayalam, let it be Rajasthani, let it be Tulu, anything that is there. Pick up a language which is not your own. That will be a very significant move forward in terms of integration. That said, there is one thing which I am deeply concerned about, that how the word secularism is used to undermine us. So my question is, when that word is used to undermine us, the moment you said something, we will be branded as Hindutva guys. That's the part which is a thing that we need to address.
Mm.
And I know one thing for sure, and I've said this before, this is the era of science and technology, and this is the era in which Sanatani is needed around the world. People need to take that message forward. We are doing it on Jaipur Dialogue, bringing that message forward. How must it multiply itself?
Okay. Look, the thing is, this whole strawman called Hindutva has been, continues to be used as a, a very effective stick to beat anybody who remotely declares that he or she is a Hindu. If you say you're a Hindu, is equal to Hindutva, as if Hindutva is something to be ashamed of, something which is bad, which is a classic Marxist or Leninist trick, which basically says, give the dog a bad name and then beat it to, people will beat it to death, stone it to death or whatever. So you don't need to be apologized. You are a Hindutva, fine. You are a Hindu, you're fine. You're a Sanatani, you're fine. It is your culture. It's fine to take pride in it. So what? Look, when Christianity was destroyed in Europe, and people who became rootless, or at least people who don't identify themselves as Christians, out of the name of charity, in the name of charity, they blindly believe that, missionaries who come to their door, or anybody from church affiliated guys who come to their door, they blindly believe they have the image has been created that these guys are a force for good. They do charity, they take care of poor people. So blindly, these guys put money in their hundi. To that extent, even after Christianity lost state power, it has still endured there, especially in America and some parts of Europe, mostly in Germany. Anyway, but we're digressing. So they are fine with saying that, even if you abuse Christianity, make fun of Jesus Christ and Mary and other things, on the face of a European or an American who's a complete non-believer, they'll take it, right? But what has also happened is that these guys are rootless. My question is, do Hindus also, those who call themselves a Hindu atheist, whatever that means, do we also want to be rootless like that? What remains? What remains? We should be perfectly fine with our stone gods, however disparaging it might sound. We should be perfect with our stone gods. We should be perfect with our Mangalartis. We should be perfect of some elements which Christian padris came here and falsely demonized as being superstitious. Those are things which held us together. Whether they're superstition or not is a question that has to be internally decided by the Hindu community. No outsider has any business to interfere in it. You hold your head proudly. As simple as that. This comes from cultural self-confidence, and that cultural self-confidence comes from what is known as hard political power, which is unafraid to assert itself in all spheres.
Right.
No matter how many times Hindu powers were beaten, they were not completely vanquished until after 1947, because with the rise of Shivaji, there was one spirit, the spirit of Kshatriya, which informed and motivated Hindu kings that the principle of Chakravarti, of political expansion. So Shivaji could rise, Peshwas could rise, Maharaja Ranjit Singh could rise, because they understood this. Maybe not at the intellectual level, but it was in their blood. It was in the DNA. साम्राज्य का स्थापन करो, साम्राज्य का विस्तार करो, उसके लिए आपको ताकत चाहिए, उसके लिए आपको क्षात्र चाहिए, उसके लिए आपको लड़ना चाहिए. You got a soft fellow covered like Mohandas Gandhi, and then a toxin. It is like it's basically like mixing poison with shit and saying that drink it beta, it is Horlicks, it is good for health. आपका शास्त्र भी गया, आपका सोसाइटी भी गया, आपका भाषा गया, आपका संस्कृति गया. What is बचा क्या? This expansionist mindset is still there in the Abrahamic cultures, whatever they call themselves, or democracies or whatever. Inherently, it is an expansionist attitude, which is what makes them give birth to Oxfams and CIAs and amnesties of the world. I'll stop here.
Right, very well explained. And now it's time to go to the audience questions. Once again, requesting everybody to please ask your questions, like the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, and support the channel. Questions? Okay, Rajat. Nehru was a descendant of Ghayasuddin Ghazi, who was a Mughal Darbari. This is true. Also, sir, this is Subramaniam Swami's history actually. About Veer Savarkar's elder brother Ganesh Savarkar, he was even a bigger patriot.
Well, this
No,
theory of Islamic descendant of Nehru, Nehru was a Nawabi and a Muslim Islamist by temperament, by his upbringing, his immediate environment. But I don't. There's really no evidence to prove that he was his antecedents can be traced to he had Muslim blood or whatever. That's not true.
this is a white lie, but it has
Yeah,
been propagated by the
yeah,
venerable Subramaniam Swami. So it
yeah,
carries a lot of
yeah,
credence by
yeah,
that
yeah,
association.
yeah.
Next, Rahul Kulkarni.
What is
Question to
that?
you. The question is to Mr. Jha, so I have to ask it.
Huh. Okay, you can read
Jha
out the
sir ji,
question.
वह इंडियन एम्बेसी टू पास धरना प्रदर्शन होना चाहिए जस्टिस फॉर गर्ल्स सेव वर्ल्ड फ्रॉम लव जिहाद इट मस्ट गो एट द इंटरनेशनल लेवल
You're muted, Vibhuti Ji.
There have been protests in the past. Recently, there were protests in Delhi, in DC. There were protests in New York as well. But unfortunately, the organizational strength is missing. Individuals are not able to influence these dharnas. So many Indian organizations are concerned about their tax-free status under a 501c39 that gives them donations as a tax-free status. They are concerned about that. I have told and I argue that that particular thing is for donation and your political endorsements. But it doesn't prevent you from expressing your views or opposition to an action taken against you by somebody else.
Hmm.
So, that also has been, we are getting some legal thinking on that. But there will be, Indians need to organize themselves. Sanatani needs to organize themselves at institutional level. That is needed, Rahul. I totally agree with you.
next question is also to you Vibhuti ji Ustad Pituddin Khan Chanchor Vibhuti sir congrats on regaining the US House. With its numbers in the US Congress, are you confident that GOP will be able to stop Biden admin from pushing laws that would enable Islamic Jihad both in the US and globally?
Look, GOP unfortunately did not benefit from whatever is known as the red wave. It didn't happen.
Hmm.
So they have the majority. It's a razor thin majority. And in these kind of scenarios, when you have two-party system, you have to necessarily have a deal. Otherwise, there are people within your own party who get the conscience pricked and they refuse to vote for your agenda. And then there are other people. Democrats are remarkably united. You've got to tip your hat to them. They remain together. Very, very rarely would you find a Democrat crosses the line. Republicans do. So the challenge, Ustad the Twitteruddin Khan, would be that how will which agendas they pick up, which issues they pick up. Hunter Biden investigation, uh, you know, investigating Biden corruption, investigating issues told by Justice Department, passing on the information to Facebook that, oh, there is no Russia collusion. That is a Russian propaganda. They have to be very clear on their agenda to what issues they pick up. If they pick up right issues, there will be a good movement. But there are there are people in the Republican Party who are very annoyed with the Mitch McConnell and McCarthy pandering to or being soft on Democratic Party during their leadership, and they are the leaders. How will that shape up will be a very, very difficult question to answer right now. But I hope they are able to address the questions which are important for the country as a whole. And I think they will do it. There is because 2 years later, the presidential election is coming. If they don't show outcomes, then we become the loser. And that's why it is important for them to demonstrate action.
Okay, next.
Indian Aborigine. Let me rephrase it, the name, sir. The guy is Rahul Roberto Rajiv Gandhi. To be precise, if it is a great.
Rajiv Gandhi, it says, not Gandhi.
Yeah.
We have no disagreement.
No disagreement. Okay, I'm going for the next one also. Veer Nathuram Gandhi. श्रद्धा को समझाते तो वो आपको अंधभक्त बोल के ब्लॉक कर देती, बट ये जो इस हलाला के जाने किया है ना, इसी की सजा नहीं मिलनी चाहिए और इसको बाइज्जत बरी कर देना चाहिए. लेट पीपल डिसाइड हिज फेट, जैसे नागाज ने नागालैंड में किया था.
Okay.
Your call.
That's a statement.
His opinion. We have nothing to add to it.
Yeah. That's right.
Harman Singh, protecting secularism but rotting away their own roots and burning down their ancestral values. Modernization of the youth. Sandeep B.
Okay. It's a statement.
So you agree or you do not agree?
Yeah, I do agree.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dr. Gaurav Pandya.
Thank you, Sab. Jahangir Gotla. We must set up our own indexes and judge the ones who are judging us. It's time to scare the scarecrow. Rate the US, UK entities, criticize the critic.
I think he's reminding you. Vibhuti.
I agree. I largely agree. And this is one thing that China does very well.
Yes.
No, there's one pending with Vibhuti Ji also.
Yeah, it is.
No. That's between us.
Yeah, that's between us. I remember that.
Oh, okay.
I had given him the task of rating the US university campuses.
Yes, this particular thing is important. I have often said it in the past that India as a country must reject these ratings. And somebody had made a very nice Twitter link on this, saying that how the Swedish organization that was rating India very poorly, the people who wrote the reports were all Pakistani ISI guys.
So yeah, this can be done in multiple ways.
Yes.
Very, very, very valid point. One way to do this is to, not exert diplomatic pressure, but financial pressure against, countries like Sweden. What is Sweden compared to India? What does it stand? Where does it stand really? In population, in terms of its contribution? ये कौन होता है? So there are ways to tighten the screws, like we did with Malaysia a few years back.
Right. The other one also to do that is that Indian municipalities. Sorry.
VDEM. This VDEM.
Yeah, this VDEM nonsense. Yeah.
They did the hunger index and
they did that. Yeah. Mm,
Yeah, and they had about 350 people
mm,
as a sample,
mm.
and all those
No,
350
look,
people.
this is all these indexes are just a variant of a very old game. It is a new, old wine in new bottle. Earlier, these indexes used to be done by journalists in the form of op-eds. There were no indexes and things like that back then. So one Swedish journalist, for example, because that country is mentioned now, he would come here and he would be wined and dined by all these Lutyens Delhi journalists. And his agenda was clear that, okay, something, we are not happy with something about India, make a negative story. So he'll come here and the Lutyens traitors would, wine and dine them and supply these journalists with exactly the negative data points that he is looking for. So beyond the Lutyens zone, he will sit there in, a Rajiv Sardesai type of journalistic ancestor's house, and he'll write it on his dining table after drinking one full bottle of vodka. And these indexes are the equivalent of those journalistic pieces.
And I will just add to that is
Hmm.
that there has to be a response from India.
Hmm.
And
There
that
has to be, yeah.
response has to be from Indian municipalities and Indian
Hmm.
assemblies and
Yeah.
Indian organizations. There are many think tanks.
Hmm.
They must say that we reject this, we don't accept it. To hell with
Hmm.
you. There has to
Hmm.
be a strong response from India. For example,
Hmm.
when they were passing resolutions after resolutions from one municipality after another condemning
Hmm.
CAA and 370, there was
Hmm.
not a single response from any Indian municipality talking about Antifa, Black Lives exploitation, and issues,
Hmm.
the social distress that happens in America. So the question is quid pro quo,
Yeah.
reciprocity.
Yeah.
We have to demonstrate that as a country. You
Hmm.
and I can't do sitting here alone
Hmm.
because the country doesn't do that.
No, that is because this is a very valid point that you brought out, and it kind of kindled a thought in my head. Those guys do it because they think as a country
Right.
and they have a specific agenda. You look at the kind of parties and the rascals as ministers and municipality and corporations heads. At the fundamental level, there has to be agreement on some lines that cannot be crossed. One of which is that, whatever those guys come up with, you have to think not as a corporator, but as a citizen of India who has sworn on the constitution that one insult to any institution, government or private, belonging to India is an insult to me. That is why they succeed in this. They think as a
Right.
country.
That's
They
right.
have an agenda. Okay, their agenda for the next 1 year, for example, is demonize India from at all platforms. Both Democrats and Republicans will come together on this. यहाँ पे you have all these, breaking India guys who are out to sell India. All these DMK buggers, all those guys, what are they? They are busy saying that we will not allow another North Aryan invasion from Delhi, it seems. So, what municipality will pass these resolutions? Tell me.
Okay, can we go to the next one?
Yeah.
Uh, does we, Nagesh Mutt, does we embrace this fraud Modi and central BJP? They are acting as they are the biggest seculars on earth. The question is not very clear to me. Is it clear to you?
No, not really.
Okay, so we pass it over, and that brings us to the end of the session, end of the
Mhm.
questions. And with that, we thank everyone, we thank the audience, and we thank Vibhuti Ji, and we thank Sandeep Balakrishna for sparing his time for this session. Thank you all very much. Jai Hind, Vande Mataram.
Jai Hind,
Vande
Vande.
Mataram. Jai Hind.